The wreckage still smoldered when they found him. His P-47 Thunderbolt lay scattered across a French meadow, engine buried 3 feet into the earth. German soldiers moved cautiously toward the American pilot, rifles raised. He stood among the debris, flight suit torn, blood running down his forehead. They expected surrender. They expected raised hands. Instead, he laughed. What happened in the next 60 seconds would become one of the most disputed, whispered, and deliberately buried stories of the 8th Air Force. Northern France, summer of 1944. The sky over Normandy had become the most contested airspace on Earth. 6 weeks after D-Day, the Allied air campaign operated at a tempo that strained both machines and men to their breaking points. American fighter groups flew 3, sometimes 4 sorties per day. Ground attack missions, escort duties, armed reconnaissance over roads choked with retreating Wehrmacht columns. The landscape below told the story of a German army in collapse. Burned trucks lined every highway. Horse-drawn artillery mixed with modern armor in desperate convoys moving east. Allied aircraft owned the daylight hours. Any vehicle that moved attracted Thunderbolts, Mustangs, and Lightnings within minutes. But the Germans had not stopped fighting. Flak batteries proliferated across the hedgerow country. Mobile anti-aircraft guns, the dreaded 20mm and 37mm pieces, traveled with every significant convoy. They had learned to hold fire until American aircraft committed to their strafing runs, then opened up at point-blank range when pilots had no room to maneuver. The mathematics were brutal. A P-47 traveling at 350 miles per hour covered roughly 500 feet per second during a strafing run. A skilled gunner needed only 2 seconds of tracking to fill that flight path with lethal steel. The Thunderbolt's radial engine and armored cockpit offered protection that other fighters lacked, but protection was not immunity. American pilots called these ground attack missions everything from milk runs to murder. The terminology depended entirely on which patch of French countryside they drew that day. Some areas had been swept clean of resistance. Others concealed flak traps that could shred an entire flight in seconds. The 358th Fighter Group had been flying these missions since before the invasion. Based at High Halden in Kent, then forward deployed to French airstrips as the front moved, they had accumulated hard experience in the art of ground attack. Their pilots knew which approach angles minimized exposure. They understood the rhythm of German flak, the pause between bursts, the telltale muzzle flashes that preceded tracer streams by milliseconds. They also knew that experience guaranteed nothing. The morning of July 27, 1944, began like countless others. Pilots gathered for briefing in a tent that smelled of canvas, fuel, and exhaustion. The mission board showed targets south of St. Lo, where German forces were attempting to consolidate defensive positions against the American breakout. Roads, rail junctions, anything that moved. First Lieutenant William R. Dunn listened to the intelligence officer describe expected resistance. Light to moderate flak. Possible fighter interception unlikely given current Luftwaffe disposition, weather clear, visibility unlimited. Dunn had heard variations of this briefing dozens of times. He knew that light to moderate was a guess. He knew that the Germans had become expert at concealing their anti-aircraft positions. He knew that clear visibility cut both ways. American pilots could see their targets, but German gunners could track American aircraft with equal clarity. None of this changed anything. The mission would fly. The war demanded it. If this history matters to you, subscribe so these stories endure. William Robert Dunn came from a world that seemed impossibly distant from the cockpit of a fighter aircraft. Born in 1916 in Minneapolis, he grew up during the Depression years that shaped an entire generation's understanding of hardship and self-reliance. His father worked when work was available. His mother stretched every dollar until it screamed. The family never starved, but comfort remained a foreign concept throughout his childhood. Dunn discovered early that he possessed two qualities that would define his life. The first was physical courage that bordered on recklessness. Childhood friends remembered him as the kid who climbed the highest, jumped the farthest, and never seemed to calculate consequences before acting. The second was a temper that flared hot and burned fast. He fought often, won more than he lost, and carried a reputation for disproportionate response to any perceived slight. These traits made him poorly suited for conventional employment and perfectly suited for war. He left home young, worked odd jobs across the Midwest, and eventually found his way to Canada in 1939. The Royal Canadian Air Force was accepting volunteers, asking few questions, and offering something that Depression-era America could not: purpose, adventure, and a steady paycheck. Dunn trained in the Canadian system, earned his wings, and transferred to the Royal Air Force as war consumed Europe. He flew Spitfires during the Battle of Britain, becoming one of the first Americans to score aerial victories in the Second World War. His combat record with the RAF was distinguished, marked by aggressiveness that sometimes crossed into insubordination. Commanding officers consistently noted the same pattern. Dunn was an exceptional pilot with exceptional instincts who consistently created exceptional problems. He violated formation discipline. He pursued targets beyond authorized ranges. He argued with superior officers in terms that military courtesy did not accommodate. When the United States entered the war, Dunn transferred to the U.S. Army Air Forces. His RAF experience made him valuable. His personality made him difficult. He received a commission, additional training on American aircraft, and eventually an assignment to the 358th Fighter Group flying P-47 Thunderbolts. The Thunderbolt suited him. The aircraft was built for punishment, 7 tons of engine, armor, and firepower that could absorb damage that would destroy lighter fighters. Its 8 50-caliber machine guns could shred ground targets with devastating efficiency. Unlike the graceful Spitfire, the P-47 was a brawler, and Dunn understood brawlers. By the summer of 1944, he had accumulated combat time that most pilots would never approach. Missions over France, Belgium, the Low Countries, escort duty protecting bomber formations, ground attack runs against every type of target the war presented. He had also accumulated a reputation. Other pilots described him in contradictory terms: fearless and foolish, skilled and reckless, the kind of wingman you wanted in a fight and dreaded in a formation. He had survived encounters that should have killed him. Some attributed this to skill. Others suspected luck that would eventually run out. Dunn himself rarely discussed these matters. He flew, he fought, he drank when missions permitted. He wrote occasional letters home that mentioned nothing of combat. He existed in the suspended animation that characterized so many combat pilots, present in each moment, disconnected from past and future, focused entirely on the next mission and the mission after that. The morning of July 27th found him in the ready room, flight gear prepared, mind already moving through the familiar checklist. Engine start, taxi, formation, join up, the flight south over the channel, the descent toward targets that intelligence had marked on acetate-covered maps. He did not know that this mission would be different. No pilot ever does. The problem that plagued American fighter pilots over France in the summer of 1944 was not the Luftwaffe. German fighters had been swept from the skies in such numbers that encounters became rare. The problem was the ground. Ground attack doctrine in the U.S. Army Air Forces had evolved through painful experience. Early in the war, fighter pilots were trained primarily for air-to-air combat. Their aircraft were optimized for altitude, speed, and maneuverability against other fighters. The concept of using these expensive, highly trained assets to attack trucks and trains seemed wasteful to many commanders. But the strategic reality of 1944 demanded adaptation. The German war machine depended on transportation networks that were vulnerable from the air. Rail yards, road convoys, fuel depots, bridge approaches. Every target destroyed meant supplies that never reached the front, reinforcements that never arrived, ammunition that never loaded into German weapons. The tactical reality of ground attack, however, was unforgiving. A fighter aircraft attacking ground targets abandoned every advantage that made it lethal in air combat. Altitude disappeared as pilots descended to effective strafing range. Speed bled away during attack runs that required stable gun platforms. Maneuverability became irrelevant when committed to a firing pass. German anti-aircraft gunners understood these limitations intimately. They had been fighting Allied aircraft for years, and they had developed tactics specifically designed to exploit the vulnerabilities inherent in strafing attacks. The most dangerous moment came during the pull-up phase. After completing a firing pass, a pilot had to climb away from the target, converting speed into altitude while traveling in a predictable path directly away from the guns that had been tracking him. This was when most aircraft were hit. This was when the mathematical certainties of ballistics overwhelmed pilot skill. American losses mounted. The 358th Fighter Group alone had lost aircraft to flak at a rate that would have been unsustainable in any other context. Replacement pilots arrived, flew a handful of missions, and disappeared. Experienced pilots pushed their luck until luck ran out. The institutional response was doctrinal adjustment, new attack profiles, steeper dive angles, coordinated suppression of flak positions before primary attacks. These changes helped at the margins, but could not eliminate the fundamental hazard. Some positions simply could not be attacked safely. Intelligence officers briefed pilots on known flak concentrations, but the information was always incomplete. German units moved constantly. New batteries appeared overnight. Positions that were safe yesterday became killing grounds today. Pilots developed their own survival strategies. Some trusted speed, making single high-velocity passes and never returning for follow-up attacks. Others trusted terrain, using hedgerows and tree lines to mask their approach. Still, others trusted prayer, though few admitted this openly. Dunn trusted instinct. He had developed a sense, honed through hundreds of combat hours, for when a situation was about to turn dangerous. Other pilots described similar intuitions, a feeling in the gut, a prickling at the back of the neck, an awareness that something was wrong before conscious analysis could identify the threat. This sense had saved him multiple times. It had pulled him out of attacks that his rational mind said were safe. It had made him break formation when flight discipline demanded he hold steady. It had created friction with commanding officers who valued predictability over survival. On July 27, 1944, that sense would prove both accurate and insufficient. The flight crossed the French coast at 12,000 feet, descending gradually toward the target area. 4 Thunderbolts in loose formation, pilots scanning the ground for targets of opportunity. The roads below showed the familiar debris of German retreat, abandoned vehicles, scattered equipment, the occasional column still moving east under the illusion that daylight travel was possible. They found a convoy near the village of Canisy. Perhaps 15 vehicles, a mix of trucks and horse-drawn wagons, moving along a secondary road. Standard procedure called for a reconnaissance pass to identify flak positions, followed by coordinated attack runs from different angles. Dunn felt it before he saw it. That familiar sensation, the tightening in his chest that preceded danger. The convoy looked wrong, too confident, too exposed, moving in daylight when German forces had learned to freeze at the sound of aircraft engines. But the mission demanded attack, and Dunn had never been one to hang back. The first pass revealed the trap. Dunn rolled into his dive, airspeed building, gun sight settling on the lead truck. At 1,500 feet, the hedgerows around the convoy erupted. Muzzle flashes from positions he had not seen. Tracer streams that seemed to materialize from empty fields. The characteristic thump of 20mm rounds punching through metal and air. He triggered his guns anyway, seeing his rounds walk across the convoy in geysers of dirt and debris. Then he was pulling back on the stick, gravity pressing him into his seat, the Thunderbolt groaning through the strain of the pull-up. Something hit the engine. He felt it before the instruments confirmed it, a vibration that had not been there moments before, a subtle wrongness in the power response. Oil pressure began dropping, temperature began rising. Standard procedure in this situation was clear. Break off the attack, climb for altitude, assess damage, head for friendly territory if possible, or find suitable terrain for an emergency landing. Dunn did none of these things. He called out the flak positions to his wingman, pulled the Thunderbolt around, and attacked again. The hedgerow guns were exposed now, their muzzle flashes marking locations that had been invisible moments before. He poured fire into one position, saw figures scattering, then broke away as return fire intensified. The engine was failing. He could hear it now, the characteristic sound of a radial engine losing cylinders, power dropping unevenly with each revolution. The oil pressure needle touched the red zone. Temperature exceeded safe limits. He was going down. The only question was where. The French countryside offered limited options. Hedgerows divided every field into small, irregular parcels. Trees lined the roads. The terrain that made Normandy difficult for ground forces made it equally difficult for emergency landings. Dunn spotted a meadow, perhaps half a mile ahead. Large enough, maybe. Clear of obvious obstacles, he nursed the dying Thunderbolt toward it, trading altitude for distance, the engine coughing and surging as remaining cylinders struggled to maintain power. The landing was controlled, but violent. The Thunderbolt touched down fast, too fast, and immediately began digging into the soft ground. The propeller struck earth and bent backward. The aircraft slewed left, then right, then came to a shuddering stop amid a spray of dirt and torn vegetation. For a moment, there was silence. The engine had stopped. The guns had stopped. Even the birds had gone quiet. Then Dunn heard voices. German voices. Close. He had come down near the convoy he had been attacking. The flak positions that had shot him down were perhaps 400 yards away, and their crews were already moving toward the crash site. Standard procedure was clear. Destroy sensitive equipment. Evade if possible. Surrender if capture was inevitable. The Geneva Convention protected prisoners of war. Resistance after the opportunity, for surrender had passed, was futile and likely fatal. Dunn had never been good at standard procedure. He climbed from the cockpit, assessing his situation with the rapid calculation that combat develops. His aircraft was destroyed. His sidearm, a standard issue, .45 caliber pistol, remained in its shoulder holster. He had no other weapons. He was injured, though the extent was unclear. Blood ran from a cut on his forehead, but his limbs functioned. The German soldiers approached in a loose tactical formation, perhaps a dozen men moving cautiously, rifles ready. They were not taking chances with the American pilot, who had just strafed their position. What happened next became the subject of conflicting accounts, official silence, and decades of speculation. The details of the encounter varied depending on who told the story and when they told it. What is known with certainty is limited. Dunn's aircraft crashed in a field near Canisy. German soldiers reached the crash site within minutes. An engagement occurred. German soldiers were killed or wounded. Dunn evaded capture and eventually reached American lines. The numbers reported by Dunn himself, and later repeated in various accounts, claimed 9 German soldiers killed in approximately 60 seconds using his .45 caliber pistol. This figure has been both accepted and questioned by historians examining the incident. The mechanics of such an engagement invite scrutiny. A standard M19-111 pistol holds 7 rounds in the magazine, plus 1 in the chamber, 8 shots total. Reloading under combat stress requires additional seconds. Accuracy with a handgun at combat distances against moving targets, while injured and exhausted, rarely approaches the precision that Hollywood suggests. Yet, combat produces outcomes that peacetime analysis struggles to explain. What can be reconstructed from available sources suggests that Dunn did not wait for the German soldiers to reach him. As they approached the crash site, expecting a wounded or disoriented pilot, he moved toward them. This violated every expectation they held about downed American airmen. Prisoners were valuable. Intelligence wanted them for interrogation. Commands wanted them for prisoner exchanges. Individual soldiers wanted them because taking prisoners was safer than fighting, and the war was clearly moving toward its conclusion. Dunn's approach changed the calculation. Instead of a static target awaiting capture, the German soldiers faced an aggressive enemy closing distance rapidly. Their formation, appropriate for approaching a crash site, was not optimized for close combat. The initial shots came fast. The .45 caliber pistol, whatever its limitations at range, was devastating at close quarters. The heavy, slow-moving bullets, designed for stopping power rather than penetration, did exactly what they were designed to do. Accounts suggest that several German soldiers fell in the first seconds before organized response was possible. Others scattered, seeking cover in terrain that offered little. A few returned fire, but firing at a moving target while taking casualties requires training and composure that most soldiers never develop. Dunn kept moving. This was the critical tactical decision, not allowing the Germans to establish firing positions, not giving them time to coordinate response, not presenting a stationary target. His experience in aerial combat, where survival depended on constant motion and aggressive action, translated directly to this ground engagement. The engagement ended as quickly as it began. The surviving German soldiers withdrew, regrouped, called for reinforcements. Dunn did not wait for them to return. He ran. The hedgerow country that made Normandy a nightmare, for armored forces, made it ideal for a single man evading pursuit. Dunn moved through ditches and tree lines, putting distance between himself and the crash site. His injuries slowed him, but did not stop him. German search parties swept the area throughout the day. They found nothing. The American pilot had disappeared into the bocage. What followed was a 36-hour evasion that tested every survival skill Dunn possessed. He moved primarily at night, hiding during daylight hours when German patrols were most active. He navigated by dead reckoning, aiming generally west toward American lines that were advancing daily through Operation Cobra. Local French civilians helped, though the extent and nature of their assistance varies in different accounts. A farmer who provided water, a woman who pointed out German positions, the resistance network that operated throughout occupied France, moving downed airmen toward safety through established escape lines. On the morning of July 29th, Dunn reached American forces near the village of Percy. He was exhausted, dehydrated, and carrying wounds that had gone untreated for 2 days. But he was alive. The debriefing that followed was extensive and, according to those who have examined the records, unusually detailed about certain aspects of the encounter while conspicuously silent about others. The aftermath of Dunn's evasion produced ripples that extended far beyond one pilot's survival. Intelligence officers noted several aspects of his account that had tactical value. His observations of German flak deployment confirmed suspicions about mobile anti-aircraft tactics. His route through the hedgerow country provided ground truth about terrain that maps could not capture. His encounter with German soldiers at the crash site offered data points about enemy response procedures. But other aspects of his account created complications. The killing of German soldiers attempting to take a prisoner occupied murky legal and ethical territory. The Geneva Convention protected prisoners of war, but it also recognized the right of combatants to resist capture until the moment of actual surrender. Where that line fell, at what point a downed pilot transitioned from combatant to prisoner, was not precisely defined. Dunn's aggressive action before capture was complete could be interpreted as legitimate combat, or it could be interpreted as something else. The distinction mattered for propaganda purposes, for maintaining relationships with the International Red Cross, for the treatment of American prisoners in German hands. The decision was made at levels above Dunn's squadron to handle the incident quietly. Official records acknowledged the shoot-down and successful evasion. They did not elaborate on the circumstances at the crash site. Dunn returned to flying status within weeks. His injuries healed. His aircraft was replaced. The war continued its relentless advance toward Germany. But the story circulated anyway. Pilots talked. Ground crew talked. The account of the American who laughed when Germans tried to capture him, who killed 9 men with a pistol, who walked through enemy territory for 2 days to return to his unit. This was the kind of story that spread through informal channels, regardless of official silence. The numbers may have grown in the telling. 9 became 10, then 12. 60 seconds became 30. The .45 caliber pistol gained almost supernatural properties. The escape became more dramatic with each retelling. This is the nature of combat stories. The kernel of truth becomes embedded in layers of embellishment until separating fact from legend requires more evidence than typically survives. What can be verified is that Dunn's combat record reflected exceptional aggressiveness throughout his service. His awards included the Silver Star, Distinguished Flying Cross, and Air Medal with multiple clusters. His performance evaluations consistently noted both outstanding flying ability and difficulty with authority. He survived the war. Many of his contemporaries did not. The tactical implications of his crash site encounter were studied, though not openly attributed to him. Survival training for pilots began emphasizing immediate action after bailout or forced landing. The instinct to wait for rescue or surrender was identified as potentially fatal in forward combat areas where enemy forces might respond faster than friendly units. The psychological element received attention as well. Pilots who survived shoot-downs and returned to combat often displayed changed behavior. Some became more cautious, haunted by the experience of vulnerability. Others became more aggressive, as if proving that the experience had not diminished them. Dunn fell into the second category. His flying after July 1944 showed increased willingness to accept risk, to press attacks beyond prudent limits, to engage targets that other pilots avoided. Whether this represented genuine fearlessness or its opposite, a need to demonstrate courage that doubt had undermined, remains unknowable. William R. Dunn left the service after the war ended, carrying with him the accumulated weight of too many missions, too many losses, too many memories that peacetime society had no framework to accommodate. He drifted for several years, The pattern was common among combat veterans: difficulty holding jobs, difficulty maintaining relationships, difficulty finding purpose in civilian life that could match the intensity of combat. The skills that made him effective in war were liabilities in peace. The aggression, the instinct for violence, the inability to accept subordination, none of these translated well to office work or factory floors. He eventually found equilibrium, though the details of his post-war life remained private. He rarely discussed his combat experiences publicly, and when he did, his accounts were notable for what they omitted as much as what they included. The crash site incident became a story he acknowledged but did not elaborate. Yes, it happened. Yes, German soldiers were killed. No, he did not care to provide details. The matter was closed. Historians who attempted to verify his account faced significant obstacles. German records from the Canisy area in late July 1944 were incomplete, fragmented by the chaos of retreat and the destruction of documents as the Wehrmacht collapsed in France. French civilian accounts were contradictory, shaped by decades of retelling and the natural tendency to embellish encounters with wartime drama. What survived were the official American records, dry, bureaucratic documents that confirmed the basic facts without illuminating the human reality. Shoot-down date, location, evasion route, return to duty, awards and decorations, performance evaluations, and the story passed from pilot to pilot, from unit to unit, from generation to generation of airmen who understood that survival in combat sometimes required actions that peacetime morality could not accommodate. Dunn died in 1995, one of the last surviving American aces from the Battle of Britain, carrying with him whatever private truth the official records never captured. His legacy remains ambiguous in ways that he might have appreciated. He was either a hero who refused to surrender when surrender was expected, or a man whose violence exceeded what warfare permitted. He was either an example of combat effectiveness under impossible circumstances, or a warning about the psychological costs of cultivating aggression in military pilots. Perhaps he was all of these things simultaneously. Combat does not produce simple narratives or clean moral lessons. It produces survivors and non-survivors, and the difference between them often depends on factors that defy comfortable analysis. What endures from his story is not the specific number of casualties or the precise sequence of events in a French meadow 80 years ago. What endures is the recognition that the men who flew these missions existed in a world where the rules that governed civilian life simply did not apply. They climbed into aircraft designed to kill. They flew into skies filled with metal and fire. They made decisions in seconds that philosophers debate for decades, and when their aircraft failed them, when they found themselves alone in enemy territory, they discovered what they were capable of, for good or ill, in ways that most human beings never experience. Dunn's laughter at the crash site, whether literal or apocryphal, captures something essential about this reality. It was not humor in the conventional sense. It was the recognition that the situation had moved beyond fear, beyond calculation, beyond the normal constraints that govern human behavior. In that moment, nothing remained but action. And Dunn acted. The French meadow where his Thunderbolt crashed has long since returned to agriculture. The hedgerows still divide the fields. The roads still wind through countryside that bears few visible scars from the summer of 1944. But somewhere, in that soil, fragments of aluminum and steel still wait. Pieces of an aircraft that carried a man to the edge of extinction and watched him walk away. Some men die in wars, others survive them, and a few, through circumstance and character, become the stories that survive longest of all, not because they were the best or the bravest, but because they remind us that human beings, pressed beyond all reasonable limits, remain capable of the unreasonable. The war demanded everything from the men who fought it. William Dunn gave everything he had, and somehow emerged with enough left over to walk home. That may be the only truth about his story that matters.